Fairbrook was the kind of suburb that looked like it belonged on a postcard. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and houses that all seemed to smile in the golden afternoon sun. It was a place where neighbors greeted each other by name, where children rode their bikes until dusk, and where the sound of lawnmowers mixed with the distant hum of sprinklers on warm summer evenings. In this peaceful environment lived Daniel Keene, a man whose presence seemed to perfectly complement the neighborhood's charm. He was in his mid-30s, tall but not imposing, with a neatly trimmed beard and a wardrobe that never strayed far from clean shirts and pressed trousers. People noticed his friendly wave in the mornings and the way he always seemed to have time for small acts of kindness. If someone's fence was broken, Daniel would quietly fix it before they had the chance to ask. If an elderly neighbor's groceries were too heavy, he would carry them inside without hesitation. When a stray dog wandered into the neighborhood, Daniel was the first to offer it food and help search for its owner. His calm, polite demeanor made him a fixture of trust in the community. Parents felt comfortable letting their children play near his home, and he never failed to hand out candy on Halloween with a warm smile. His house reflected the same sense of order and reliability he projected to the world. The paint was always fresh, the hedges perfectly trimmed, and the white picket fence looked as though it had been lifted straight from a magazine. On weekends, Daniel could often be seen tending to his flower beds, planting bright marigolds in neat rows, or cleaning the gutters with quiet efficiency. Inside, everything had its place. Counters gleamed, floors shone, and the faint scent of cedar polish lingered in the air. To anyone watching, Daniel's life seemed blissfully ordinary, even enviable. But Daniel himself liked it that way. He knew the power of being overlooked, the security that came from blending seamlessly into the background. He made sure his reputation stayed spotless, going out of his way to attend neighborhood events, offering to help with community projects, and always showing up when someone needed a hand. People saw him as reliable, perhaps even admirable, a man who embodied the safe, steady heartbeat of Fairbrook. Yet behind the locked door of his mind, Daniel carried something far darker. It wasn't visible in his polite conversations or friendly smiles, but it was there, an unshakable shadow that clung to him. He had learned long ago that the best way to keep secrets was to hide them in plain sight. The neighborhood saw a good man because that was the image he carefully curated. But beneath the calm surface of his life, there was a restlessness, an urge he never spoke of, one that had been with him for years. Every wave, every neighborly favor, every casual laugh was part of a carefully constructed mask, hiding the truth from a community that thought it knew him. On the morning Grace Miller vanished, the air in Fairbrook was crisp, with the faint scent of rain lingering from the night before. Grace, a 27-year-old schoolteacher, left her small apartment just after sunrise. She was the kind of person who filled a room with warmth, known for her patience with students and her habit of greeting neighbors with a cheerful wave. That day, she was dressed in her usual professional attire, her hair neatly tied back, and a travel mug of coffee in her hand. She locked her door, walked to her car, and drove away, unaware that it would be the last time anyone in the neighborhood would see her. When Grace didn't show up to work, it was unusual enough to raise immediate concern. She was dependable to the point of being predictable, never late, never absent without notice. By mid-morning, her colleagues began calling her phone, only to reach voicemail. Her family, living in a nearby town, was contacted, but they hadn't heard from her either. At first, people thought there might be a simple explanation: a dead phone battery, a flat tire, a sudden illness, but as the hours passed, those explanations felt less and less likely. Late that afternoon, Grace's car was found parked on a quiet street just a few blocks from her apartment. It wasn't damaged, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. On the passenger seat sat her phone, screen dark and smudged with fingerprints. There were no signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no scattered belongings, nothing to indicate panic. The scene was unsettling precisely because it seemed so undisturbed, as though Grace had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. News of her disappearance spread quickly through Fairbrook. Neighbors began locking their doors earlier than usual, parents kept their children close, and whispers about what might have happened drifted through grocery store aisles and coffee shop lines. Flyers with her photograph appeared on lampposts, shop windows, and community boards. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through wooded trails, empty lots, and the edges of the nearby lake. Among the volunteers was Daniel Keene. He showed up early, wearing a reflective vest and holding a stack of freshly printed flyers. He worked tirelessly, moving from door to door, speaking to residents, asking if they had seen or heard anything unusual. He brought bottled water for the search teams and offered words of encouragement to Grace's worried friends and family. His dedication did not go unnoticed, and several people commented on how deeply he seemed to care. But as night after night passed without answers, unease settled into something heavier. The search parties grew smaller, and the once hopeful chatter turned into a grim acceptance that Grace might never come home. Still, Daniel kept attending every meeting, his face composed, his tone calm. For anyone watching, he appeared to be just another concerned neighbor, committed to finding the truth. Yet for those who knew what would come next, his presence would later feel disturbingly out of place, like a shadow hiding in plain sight. 2 weeks after Grace Miller's disappearance, the initial shock in Fairbrook had shifted into a tense, lingering dread. The search teams had thinned out, but a handful of determined residents still combed the outskirts of town, hoping for a clue. On a damp, overcast afternoon, a local teenager named Ben was exploring an overgrown drainage ditch at the edge of the neighborhood. The ditch, choked with weeds and litter, was the kind of place people rarely paid attention to. It had rained earlier that day, and the ground was soft, muddy, and slick beneath his sneakers. Ben's attention was caught by something glinting faintly in the mud. At first, he thought it was a soda can or a scrap of foil. But as he crouched closer, he saw that it was a delicate charm bracelet, bent slightly out of shape and speckled with dirt. Even through the grime, the tiny engraved initials, GM, were visible on one of the charms. His pulse quickened as he remembered the missing posters that had been plastered across town. He didn't touch it again, just stared for a moment before running home to tell his father, who quickly called the police. Officers arrived and cordoned off the area with yellow tape. The ditch became a flurry of activity as investigators carefully sifted through the mud and debris. What began as the recovery of a single bracelet turned into something far more sinister. As they dug deeper, they unearthed more objects, rings, necklaces, and earrings, each worn with age and weathered by time. Some pieces were broken, others tarnished beyond recognition, but a few were still identifiable. The chilling realization came when detectives matched several items to other women who had vanished in neighboring towns over the last decade. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Fairbrook had never been linked to those older cases, and the idea that they might be connected was almost unthinkable. The ditch, once ignored and overgrown, was now a crime scene of enormous significance. Media vans began lining the streets, their cameras capturing every move of the forensic teams. Curious residents gathered at a distance, whispering in disbelief as rumors spread faster than the official updates. When investigators mapped the location, the proximity was impossible to ignore. The ditch lay less than 100 meters from the backyard fence of Daniel Keene's home. The neat garden and white picket fence suddenly seemed to frame something much darker. Still, there was no direct evidence linking him to the buried items, at least not yet. Detectives knew they needed more before making any accusations, but the coincidence was troubling. That night, the image of the charm bracelet appeared on every local news channel. Grace's family confirmed it had belonged to her, a gift from her mother on her 21st birthday. The revelation brought fresh grief and anger, reigniting the search for answers. Behind closed doors, law enforcement began piecing together a timeline, quietly narrowing their focus on individuals who lived near the ditch. While the rest of Fairbrook slept uneasily, one home in particular was about to face a scrutiny it had never known before. The search of Daniel Keene's home began early in the morning, just after sunrise. A police warrant had been secured overnight, and by the time officers arrived, the quiet street was already dotted with marked vehicles. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their breath fogging the glass as they watched uniformed officers walk up Daniel's pristine driveway. He stepped outside calmly, wearing a neatly buttoned shirt, as though the commotion was nothing more than an inconvenience. Without protest, he allowed them inside. At first glance, the interior of the house matched his public image, immaculate and organized to the point of precision. The living room looked as though it had been staged for a magazine shoot, with books arranged by size, not a speck of dust in sight, and every picture frame aligned perfectly on the walls. The kitchen counters gleamed under the overhead lights, the stainless steel appliances polished to a mirror-like shine. Officers moved methodically, opening cabinets, checking closets, photographing each room, but they found nothing out of place. It was in the basement that the atmosphere began to shift. The space was as tidy as the rest of the home, yet one wall seemed oddly positioned, its measurements not quite matching the blueprints police had obtained. Closer inspection revealed faint seams in the drywall and a section of flooring that bore subtle scuff marks, as if something heavy had been moved back and forth. An officer tapped along the wall, the hollow echo confirming their suspicion. Behind the wall was empty space. When they removed the paneling, a narrow doorway emerged, leading to a small, windowless room. The air inside was cool and stale, heavy with a faint scent of old paper and something metallic. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow glow over the contents. Along one side of the room were shelves stacked with boxes, each labeled neatly with a woman's name and a date. Inside the boxes were personal belongings, watches, scarves, letters, and photographs, carefully arranged as though they were treasured keepsakes. In some boxes, investigators found strands of hair sealed in plastic, a detail that chilled even the most seasoned officers. On a desk in the corner lay a stack of leather-bound journals. The entries were disturbingly meticulous, documenting in cold, clinical detail how each woman had been followed, observed, and eventually taken. The tone was detached, almost businesslike, with notes about routines, habits, and vulnerabilities. Among the names were several from missing persons cases that had gone unsolved for years, stretching beyond Fairbrook into neighboring towns. Forensic teams began collecting every item, photographing each one before sealing it into evidence bags. The room felt oppressive, as though the air itself carried the weight of the lives it represented. Upstairs, Daniel remained seated at his kitchen table, silent and composed, sipping from a cup of tea as though nothing unusual was happening. Outside, news crews were already setting up along the street, the hum of their generators mixing with the low murmur of officers exchanging grim updates. The facade of the perfect neighbor had been shattered, and the truth was now out in the open for all to see. The evidence against Daniel Keene was overwhelming. The boxes from the hidden room, the journals, and the DNA matches tied him to 5 women whose disappearances had haunted investigators for years. The media swarmed Fairbrook, broadcasting every detail, turning the quiet suburb into the center of a nationwide spectacle. Residents who once trusted Daniel now spoke of him in hushed, horrified tones, unable to reconcile the man who fixed fences and handed out cookies with the predator described in police reports. Daniel, however, seemed untouched by the chaos. In court appearances, he walked in with the same measured steps, his posture straight, his expression calm. He listened to the charges without flinching, his gaze fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as though the proceedings were happening to someone else entirely. Prosecutors prepared for what they believed would be a straightforward conviction, bolstered by the sheer volume of physical evidence. But during the review of Daniel's journals, investigators stumbled upon something that didn't fit. Among the entries describing victims was a name unfamiliar to the case files: Rebecca Lane. The entry detailed how Daniel had followed her for weeks, documenting her morning jogs, her grocery shopping, even the route she took to work. It ended abruptly, without the kind of conclusion present in the other accounts. There was no mention of her disappearance, only a note that she had been lost. At first, detectives assumed lost meant she had been killed and the body never recovered. When they searched for records on Rebecca Lane, they were stunned to find she was alive. She had moved to another state nearly 8 years earlier and was living under her married name. Contacted by investigators, she agreed to speak, curious and unsettled by the sudden attention. She confirmed she had known Daniel briefly when she lived in Fairbrook. They had met at a local market, and he'd been unusually attentive, often appearing in places she went. She remembered feeling uneasy, sensing that his interest in her was deeper than casual acquaintance. Rebecca revealed that just before she moved away, she had begun noticing subtle signs of intrusion, items in her apartment slightly out of place, unfamiliar footprints on her porch after rain. She never had proof of anything sinister, but the feeling of being watched had grown strong enough to make her avoid him. Her relocation, she now realized, might have saved her life. This revelation reframed everything. Daniel had not only killed but had also stalked others who narrowly escaped becoming victims. The meticulous notes in his journals suggested that Rebecca was not the only one who had slipped through his grasp. The thought that there might be more unidentified targets chilled investigators and unsettled the public. When the trial concluded, the verdict was as expected: guilty on all charges, with a life sentence and no possibility of parole. But the twist lingered in people's minds. It wasn't just the crimes he had committed, it was the knowledge that he had planned for many more. Fairbrook would never forget Daniel Keene, not because of the man they thought they knew, but because of the predator he had been all along, hiding in plain sight.